that mindsets can change. And therefore I have the confidence that there is a symbiotic relationship between mindsets and change on the ground. That the more change that is on the ground, the more it is likely that mindsets will change. And the more mindsets changed, the more there will be change on the ground. So I do not think we should allow the persistence of old mindsets to stand in the way of moving forward, nor expect that we can move forward by ignoring the mindsets that actually exist. And the suggestion made by the young lady there, that we should have Pakistani channels being shown in India, would I think be a significant contribution to it. Indeed, while we must have separate national anthems, I think we could consider as a common national anthem, Mundi Badnaam Hui. So I am optimistic. I just don't think the kind of extreme language that was popular to use in India and Pakistan 50, 60 years ago is now at all acceptable. It has to be couched in different words and different tones, which is why I stressed that the communal animosity of the past is now replaced by national hostility. And in this context, I would like to agree with the Foreign Secretary that it is far more difficult to move the Indian mindset than it is to move the Pakistani mindset. And that is, I think, not because Pakistanis are better human beings than Indians, but principally because the extent of insecurity, national and social, inside Pakistan is much greater than in India. So, I mean, we have strategic depth within our country that extends to my constituency, which is so far south that if I fall out of my bathtub, I'll find myself in Sri Lanka. So there is, I think, less concern in India than there is in Pakistan. Which is why I'm amazed that there are so many Indians, including the Indian Army, who would like to show the Pakistani threat as an overwhelming one. Of course Pakistan is a threat if we don't reconcile with them. And if we do reconcile with Pakistan, then maybe the Gandhian perception that the two of us could live together, or should I say the Mazhar Ali Khan conception, would come true. The fact of the matter is that I think until things went wrong after the 17th of August 1947, when the Radcliffe Award came after the two countries had been created and led to this emptying of minorities from certainly the Punjab on both sides and to some extent from Uttar Pradesh and Bihar on the other side. And the kind of, it was halal in the west and jhatka in the east. No, the other way around. It was jhatka in the west and halal in the east. For the exchange of populations then started only in 1949 and led to the Nehru-Lear Pact. So I think we are beyond all that now. I think we've got, Pakistan has become a settled fact. And the horrors of Pakistan, its creation, are also a historical memory rather than a lived experience. And to the extent to which Indians and Pakistanis meet, whether it is in our respective countries or as the young man who met up with Indians and Bangladeshis in Britain said, outside of India, it's a very, very warm relationship. Indeed, I've always believed that my own personal warm feelings towards Pakistan arose on my first Saturday at Cambridge. I'd already been at Cambridge for 5 days and there was no girlfriend in sight. So I looked up varsity and found there was a dance somewhere which I could afford to go to. So getting in was not difficult after putting down my 2 and 6. But having arrived at the edge of the dance floor, what on earth do you do? I mean, how do you then take the next step of asking somebody to dance? So I stood at the edge of the dance floor and I watched one particular girl who danced with more than one colored man. And that gave me the confidence to go up to her and say, would you like to dance? And she said, yes, of course. And we went onto the floor. But tragically, in those days, we used to have either 45s or 78s. So no song lasted more than 3 minutes. So my 3 minutes of heaven ended, and she very, very kindly looked at me, bowed, and she said, thank you very much, and went back to her place. So a bit stunned, I came back to where I'd been standing, and there was this Pakistani guy standing next to me, who said, "Arey, tu waqt kyun zaya karta hai? Ye to chali hi nahi." From there onwards, I realized that India-Pakistan cooperation is needed as much in war as in love. And I must tell you the end of the story, which is almost unbelievable. On my last, virtually my last day at Cambridge, I had by then become sufficiently well known to be able to attend what were called bird and bottle parties, which meant that if you brought your girlfriend along and you brought a bottle of beer, then you were allowed entry to any party, whether you'd been invited or not. And when I arrived at this BNB party, I saw across me the same girl with whom I danced in 1961. And as I walked towards her, she beamed and said that I've been following your career with the greatest interest. So I said, you were the first I danced with, I swear you're the last one to the floor. That's how that story happened. So there is clearly from the Gulf, the experience in the Gulf, the experience in the Midlands, the experience in the United States, a possibility which is very strong of Indians and Pakistanis getting together. Now the problem with Indians encountering each other abroad is that they tend to take their mindsets with them. Whereas there's an evolution of mindsets at home. So I don't think friendships in Doha or in Kuwait are any substitute for friendships in India. And in fact, I think some of these national associations, especially in the United States of America, do an enormous lot of harm. Almost all the communalism in India, the anti-Muslim sentiment in India, is stoked from the United States of America. It's not indigenous to our soil. It's coming from those who are frozen in history. So I accept that the psychological dimension is an extremely important one, but I do not see it as an independent factor. I see it as being modified by ground realities and as affecting ground realities, and will be resolved only as we go along rather than ab initio. Equally with regard to the military, after all these 30 or 40 years and taking off from the point that I agree with the Foreign Secretary that it's going to be more difficult in India than here, I find large numbers of Indians, I'd say 900 million, 1 billion, have no view on Pakistan at all. It's just too far away. But of those who are most concerned, I see no difference between what is alleged to be the mindset of the Pakistan military and the mindset that I know of the Indian Foreign Service. In fact, quicker than dissolve the Pakistan military, I'd like to dissolve the Indian Foreign Service. For their raison d'etre is asthma. What do you do if there's no enemy in Pakistan? You'll end up pushing cultural programs in Paraguay. So therefore, there is a vested interest in our South Bloc in becoming more and more and more expert. And one of them, my successor in Karachi, who is often to be seen on television, being completely abusive of his former hosts. I mean, he shows his expertise, this is Pakistan. He shows his expertise by knowing that the commander of the 111 brigade has changed and what happened to Jahangir Karamat in some year. If you wish to get lost in the trees for the woods, then that is one way of approaching this. If you wish to see the bigger picture, then these are incidental factors to be taken into account and not overwhelming obstacles that stand in the way. And I have given you examples. I don't know what conviction I've carried, because on this point I carry, I think, more conviction in India than in Pakistan, that the military is terrible for Pakistan, but not quite so horrible for India. But this has resulted in young Pakistanis coming up to me and saying, you support military rule in Pakistan? And I try to tell them that no, I can do nothing about military or civil rule in Pakistan. I just have to accept whoever is there. And that 1958 syndrome of Jawaharlal Nehru, saying I won't talk to the military, was perhaps appropriate in 1958, but is completely out of place in 2012. And I would hope that we can deal with civilian governments here. But if you don't produce civilian governments for us to deal with, well, we have no alternative but to deal with the military or the military influence. Now, we are often asked, why don't we talk directly to the army? Well, every time the army is in power, we do talk directly with them. And at that time, they say, it's the army that's in the way. Then we say, right, the army is gone home, now there's a civilian government. There is the shadow of the army always over the civilians. Yeah, this is true, but what happened in India in 1991? We arrived at a Siachen agreement. My friend Salim Abbas Jilani, whom I first met when he was heading the Karachi Electric Supply Corporation, and I thought he was overcharging me. I went to see him, he said he could do nothing about my electricity bill, but he could do something about Siachen. And there was an agreement between him and N.N. Vora, who was then Additional Secretary of Defense and is now Governor Jammu and Kashmir. He came to an agreement. He was asked to go back to his hotel and told that at 4 o'clock that afternoon, the media had been called and the ceremonial signature would take place. And the Indian Army dug in its heels. And on an issue like this, if the Indian Army, which is much more under the control of the Indian Civil Authority than is perhaps the case here, there is a need to defer to what the Indian armed forces regard as a crucial security issue, then I'm not surprised that in Pakistan, where these national security concerns are much more India-centric and much more concentrated, that there would be these problems. But the fact of there being these problems, psychological, institutional, I don't think should stop us from trying to change it. I don't guarantee success. But if we don't engage, I do guarantee the continuation of tension. And I didn't want to say it then in my speech, but I do want to say it now in the question and answer session. We both got this lunatic thing called the nuclear bomb. And I regard it as completely lunatic, because if we set off a nuclear bomb in Lahore, and have the satisfaction of seeing my place of birth blown up in a few seconds, but exactly 8 seconds later, if the wind is in the right direction, then it's going to affect the hometown of my wife, Amritsar. So does it make any sense? This is a weapon that is completely unusable against each other, and yet we cling to it like my little Uma, my granddaughter, who wants to hold on to her teddy bear because it gives her a sense of being comforted. So the nuclear weapons are playing the role of the blanket that little Charlie gets in the cartoons and that Uma gets from her teddy bear. I don't see that it serves any very great national security purpose, but if anyone were to suggest in either country that the sensible thing is to get rid of it, they'd say that you're either a lunatic or Shankar Aiyar, and then I'm missing. Anyway, there are these difficulties. I think that they can be overcome. And I do accept what the young lady had to say about television channels. I really don't see why we should be threatened by Pakistani theatres. And your news channels I would particularly welcome, because the bad behavior of your anchors vis-a-vis distinguished Pakistanis is considerably worse than the terrible behavior of the Indian anchors vis-a-vis people who, like me, who should really count. At least we're doing something, they're only commenting on it. But from my Urdu is not good enough, but from the expressions on their faces, I think the way in which distinguished people here are treated really makes me shudder. And I think that's the only reason I got over the most dangerous episode in my life. The anchor suddenly said to a voice that was coming across into the studio here in Islamabad, some name like Hamid. So I thought it was Hamid Mir. So I said, "Hi, yaar," and then discovered it was a famed ex-chief of the ISI. I think that's the closest assassinated. So this TV thing is a very, very good idea. But as for currency, I'm afraid I face the same problem as you do. And once when I was flogging a book of mine in Pakistan, several thousand rupees in Pakistani currency came into my hands. And I didn't know what to do with them because nobody in India was willing to accept that. So I have to bring it back into Pakistan. And so long as you have a trustworthy smuggler to look after your scotch or to look after your dollars, there'll be some way of changing it. And we find endless stocks who are hanging around on the Wagah side of the Atari-Wagah border who desperately want to change our Indian rupees into Pakistani rupees. And since the problem does not, I don't encounter it on the other side, although I'm sure there must be people there who are only too willing to do this as well. But yes, a sensible, logical thing to do would be to make these currencies convertible into each other, because that's going to be absolutely essential when we move into trade, and much more when we move into mutual investment. Now I come to the issue that came up in about 5 different questions. Water. I think we should A, accept that water is a serious question, and B, accept that before we politicize it, we look at the facts. Back in 1960, the agreement essentially was that 3 of the rivers would be exclusively for the use of Pakistan, and 3 of the rivers would be exclusively for the use of India. Now, I don't know what use Pakistan has made of its waters, that's for you to say. But we have barely used 20% of our water over the last, for irrigation purposes, over the last 50 years. The Indian performance on utilizing the waters that have been entitled to it are so poor that instead of using it in India, much of it is actually flowing into Pakistan. That is a fact. At the same time, there's been such a change in the technology of dams that it is no longer true as it was in 1960, that you could only build a dam which had a large reservoir behind it, which gave you the opportunity of switching on or switching off. Your own dams here, the Mangra Dam, the other one, Talveda. Now these are dams which are classical dams as we have in India. But I think we built our last major dam, that is the Nandala Dam. And that's because people are objecting strongly to being displaced. The era of the major dam has ended, not only because it's not necessary anymore, but also because people won't stand for it anymore. And so what we're talking about are run-of-the-water barriers. And some of these run-of-the-water barriers, what you call the Ola barrage, which gives the impression that you lower it and Pakistan doesn't have any water, you raise it, and Pakistan gets too much water, and so you move from drought to flood and flood to drought. We call the Tulbul Navigation Project, because those rivers, that whole system, was used before partition for conducting the trade of Kashmir with the rest of the world. In the first instance through West Punjab and Sindh, and later through I've been told that we need to get to lunch, so I'll try and do this very quickly. We didn't know, we now want to restore the possibility of navigation. And so what you call the Wula Barrage is what we call the Tulbul Navigation Project. It's a bit of looking at a glass half full or half empty, but there are advantages and there are disadvantages. And I think the suggestion made that there should be joint management would have to be examined very carefully. For if the management is to be in the whole basin, it would not only be upstream, it would also be downstream. And the extent to which we can interfere in sovereign decisions of Pakistan would make it a bit tough for us to say that no, there can be a Pakistani presence in what we regard as Indian territory, but that an Indian presence in Pakistani territory would be unacceptable. I think I gave this reference to Ramaswamy Aiyar's article in the Hindu of 28th January. That's only 3 or 4 days ago. I commend it to you because he suggests that we must have joint examination of data. We must have joint ground examinations. This business of having some third party come and certify that your views are wrong and my views are right is not at all acceptable for the good reason that we never felt very happy about what happened in the Ran of Kutch, which is an argument you won. And therefore you never feel happy about Kangli Har because that's an argument we won. So if we continue to all the time be in somebody else's court, there is a problem. So I think we need to move in a very practical way beyond separate investigations to joint investigation. And perhaps that would lay the ground to actually reaching joint management. I suggest that you try joint management of the Indian basin, of the Indus basin, between Punjab and Sindh over here. We've had terrible problems in the interstate waters in India. And I remember years ago when one of my consuls went to see G.M. Syed, he said, these Indus waters treaties must absolutely cancel it when Sindh becomes Sindhu Desh. So Amitabh Tripathi, he asked in a slightly bewildered way, but it's helped us so much in our Punjab that we got water for irrigation and converted a desert into the granary of India. And G.M. Syed thought about it and he says, Punjabis